The porch of the old wooden cabin catches the last rays of the June sunset, painting the Oregon rock face behind it in shades of amber and gold. Ethan Caldwell sits in his handmade rocking chair, the one he built 40 years ago, when his hands were still young and steady. He's 62 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from decades of squinting into the desert sun. Those lines deepen as he watches his grandson Tyler standing by the dusty sedan's shoulders, hunched eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The boy is 16. 2 weeks ago, his father died in a construction accident. His mother, Ethan's daughter, is in the final stages of cancer treatment 300 miles away in Portland. Tyler has nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. He stands there in the fading light, looking exactly the way Ethan looked 43 years ago, lost and broken and convinced the world has nothing left to offer him. Ethan's voice, when he speaks, carries the gravelly warmth of age and hard-won wisdom. You standing there reminds me of myself at 19, Tyler. Lost everything. Didn't know where tomorrow was. Looking at this land like it was a trap instead of a gift. He pauses, letting the silence stretch. The desert air is cooling now, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain that might never come. But I understand you, son, because I stood right where you're standing, and what I learned here, what this place taught me, that's what kept me alive for 43 years. I think it's time I told you about it. Time I told you about your great-grandfather Samuel, about the cave, about the truth I thought I'd lost. Tyler moves closer, reluctant but drawn by something in the old man's voice. His sneakers scrape against the worn wooden steps. Mom said I had to come here. Tyler says, his voice cracking like thin ice. Said you'd help me. Ethan nods slowly, a sad smile touching his lips. Your mother knows the story. She grew up hearing me tell it. Now it's your turn. He gestures to the chair beside him. Tyler hesitates, then sits. The wood creaks beneath him, familiar and solid. What do you see when you look at this land? Ethan asks. Tyler glances around at the well-maintained cabin, the carefully tended property, the modern solar panels gleaming on the roof. It's nice, but Mom said you inherited it when you had nothing. Ethan's laugh is soft and knowing. That's right, but that nothing turned out to be everything, Tyler. Let me tell you how. He settles deeper into his chair, and his voice takes on the cadence of a man preparing to unearth buried treasure. The day I turned 19 was the day the state of Oregon officially stopped considering me their problem. The old man's eyes drift closed for a moment, and when he opens them again, they're looking not at the sunset before him, but at a memory 43 years distant. There was no cake that day in March 2025, no party, just a cardboard box containing 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of t-shirts, a birth certificate, and a social security card that felt like a forgery in young Ethan's trembling hands. For 12 years, he had been a ward of the state, a case file, a number in a system designed for temporary solutions that so often became permanent. Then, with the stroke of a pen on documents he wasn't allowed to read, he was free. It felt less like freedom and more like being pushed from a moving vehicle. Ms. Rebecca Thorne, his caseworker for the final 2 years, handled the discharge. She had a face permanently etched with tired sympathy, a look Ethan had seen on a dozen caseworkers before her. They all wore it like a uniform. She sat across from him in her beige office, the air thick with stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. A stack of papers formed a flimsy barrier between his past and his uncertain future. Okay, Ethan, she said, tapping a manicured nail on the top page. This is it. You're officially an adult. Congratulations, I guess. The humor was so dry it could have started a wildfire. Ethan just nodded, hands clasped tight in his lap to keep them from shaking. His entire life sat in that box at his feet. It didn't seem like enough foundation to build an adulthood on. Now, Miss Thorne continued, sliding a thick manila envelope across the desk. We need to discuss your inheritance. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. Inheritance. It sounded foreign, like something from a movie about people whose lives mattered. My what? Your inheritance, she repeated, voice patient but strained. From your grandfather, Samuel Caldwell. It's been held in trust by the state since his passing, which was 11 years ago. Since you were a minor with no legal guardian, it defaulted to our care until you came of age. Ethan's breath caught. Grandfather. The name was a ghost, a whisper from a life he barely remembered before the system swallowed him whole. He had faded photographs in his mind of a kind, wrinkled face, the smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco, strong hands that could fix anything. Samuel had tried to keep him after his parents died, but the state had its reasons. Old age, lack of income, a house deemed unsuitable. They had their checklist, and Samuel didn't tick the boxes. Ethan hadn't heard anything about him since they took him away at 7 years old. He'd assumed his grandfather had simply faded from the world, forgotten and alone, leaving nothing behind. He left me something. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Ms. Thorne gave him that sympathetic smile again. Ethan, I need you to manage your expectations. It's not a fortune. It's a piece of property. She pushed the envelope closer. Ethan's name was typed on the front in official letters that made it look important, substantial. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. Inside was a deed brittle and yellowed with age, and a single rusted key attached to a small wooden tag carved with the initials SC. Ethan unfolded the deed carefully. The legal language was dense, but he could make out the important parts. A plot of land, 5 acres in Harlan County, a place he'd never heard of 300 miles east of Portland. And under the description of the property in parentheses were the words that would change everything. Includes natural cavern formation. A cave. It's a piece of land in the middle of nowhere, Ethan, Ms. Thorne said, her tone gentle, trying to soften a blow she thought was coming. The county assesses its value at next to nothing. The land is mostly rock, unsuitable for farming or development. The only structure is a dilapidated hunting cabin that's probably been condemned for years, and the cave, well, it's just a hole in the ground. We had it appraised as per protocol. It's worthless. Worthless. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. A worthless piece of rock and a hole in the ground. That was his inheritance. That was the final word from the grandfather he'd spent his childhood trying not to forget. For a moment, hot, bitter anger surged through Ethan's chest. Samuel had left him nothing. He'd abandoned him twice, once to the system and once to this cruel joke from beyond the grave. There's more, Miss Thorne said, pulling out another document on law firm letterhead. There's a standing offer to purchase the land from a development corporation, Titan Industries. They've been trying to buy up parcels in that area for a while now. The offer is $5,000. She looked at him, eyes trying to convey the gravity of her suggestion. Ethan, my advice as your former caseworker, and just as a person, is to take the money. It's not much, but it would be a start, enough for a deposit on an apartment, some food, a chance to get on your feet. $5,000. It sounded like $1 million to a kid with $200 to his name. It was a bus ticket to anywhere else. A clean break. The smart choice, the logical choice. Sell the worthless land, take the cash, never look back. Forget the ghost of a grandfather who'd left him a hole in the ground. But something nagged at him, a tiny splinter of doubt working its way deeper. They want to buy it? Ethan asked the question, feeling stupid as soon as it left his lips. If it's worthless, why do they want it? Ms. Thorne sighed, the sound of 1,000 frustrating conversations. Developers, Ethan, they buy up cheap, unwanted land and sit on it for decades hoping it becomes valuable. Or maybe they want it for mineral rights or access to other parcels. Who knows? The point is they're offering you a way out, a fresh start. Ethan looked down at the key in his palm. It was old, ornate in a simple way, the kind of key you might see in a fairy tale. It felt impossibly heavy. It was a key to a place he'd never seen, a place that was supposedly his. A worthless place. A forgotten place. Just like him. Something inside him, some stubborn, foolish flicker of defiance, refused to let go. For 12 years, other people had made every decision for him. They decided where he lived, what he ate, who he was allowed to become. They decided his grandfather wasn't good enough. They decided this land was worthless. Now, for the first time in his life, the decision was his. I want to see it. Ethan said, the words surprising him as much as they did her. Miss Thorne's carefully constructed patience finally cracked. Ethan, be realistic. It's a 300-mile bus ride to the nearest town, and then you'd have to find a way to get out to the property itself. There's no electricity, no running water. What are you going to do, camp out in a cave? You have nothing. I have a deed, Ethan said, his voice firmer now. And a key. She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe frustration, maybe just maybe a sliver of respect. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. Okay, Ethan, it's your life, your decision. She slid a bus voucher and a small envelope across the desk. This is your discharge stipend. $200. It's meant to last you until you find it well. Don't spend it all on the trip. Ethan stood, stuffing the deed, the key, and the money into his jacket pocket. He picked up his cardboard box, and it felt a little heavier now, weighted with possibility or foolishness, he couldn't tell which. The office that has been the backdrop for the final chapter of his institutional life suddenly seemed small and suffocating. Thank you, Ms. Thorne, Ethan said, the words tasting like ash and obligation. Good luck, Ethan, she replied quietly. Try to make good choices. He walked out of that office, down the long, sterile hallway of the Department of Family Services, and out into the gray Portland drizzle. The door clicked shut behind him with the sound of finality. He was 19. He was an adult. He was homeless, jobless, and his only worldly possessions were a box of clothes and a deed to a worthless cave. And he was heading toward it with no idea why. He just knew he had to. He had to see the last piece of his grandfather, even if it was just a hole in the ground. He had to know for himself if that was all Samuel thought he was worth. The bus ride was a long, slow bleed from one world into another. The city, with its concrete and noise and perpetual gray haze, gradually gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to farmland, and finally to the vast, empty expanse of eastern Oregon. The landscape flattened. The trees grew sparse. The sky opened up into a brilliant, aching blue that Ethan hadn't seen in years. He sat with his forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window, his box tucked between his feet, watching the world he knew disappear behind him. For 12 years, his world had been confined to group homes, schools, supervised outings, everything scheduled, controlled, beige. Now the sheer scale of the landscape outside was overwhelming. The mountains on the horizon looked like jagged teeth. The plains stretched on forever, dotted with sagebrush and strange rock formations. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The other passengers were a quiet, transient bunch, a young mother with a fussy baby, an old man in a cowboy hat who slept with his mouth open, a group of college kids heading home for the weekend. No one paid Ethan any mind, and for that he was grateful. He was an expert at being invisible, a survival skill learned quickly in the system. Don't draw attention. Don't cause problems. Just exist. As the miles rolled by, his anger at Samuel began to curdle into a strange sort of grief. He tried to summon more memories to piece together the fragments he had. He remembered Samuel teaching him how to skip stones on a river, his voice a low rumbling laugh. He remembered the calloused feel of his grandfather's hand holding his own small one. He remembered a story Samuel used to tell about a man who could talk to birds. But the details were blurry, like old photographs left out in the sun too long. Who was Samuel really? Why hadn't he fought harder? And why, after all this time, would his only message be a piece of useless land? Ethan thought about the $5,000, the smart choice. Ms. Thorne's voice echoed in his head. A fresh start. He could get off this bus at the next big town, find the nearest law office, sign the papers, and be done with it. He could have a real chance. An apartment, a Jeep, a life. It was so tempting, siren song of safety and normalcy. All he had to do was let go of this foolish, sentimental journey. Let go of a ghost. But he couldn't. The key in his pocket felt like a lodestone pulling him eastward. It was more than just a key. It was a question. And Ethan couldn't live with himself if he didn't find the answer, even if the answer was that his grandfather hadn't cared, even if the answer was nothing at all. Near the end of the journey, Ethan overheard two college students talking in the seats behind him. My uncle said there's a huge aquifer under Harlan County, one of them said. Some corporation's been buying up land for years, but nobody knows where the water is. Seriously, out in that wasteland? Yeah, worth millions if they find it. Ethan's heart jumped. Could it be? No. It couldn't. Just a coincidence. But the seed of doubt or hope had been planted. The bus finally pulled into the town of Juniper Creek late in the afternoon. It wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A single main street lined with a gas station, a diner, a general store, and a post office. A handful of houses scattered around their paint, peeling under the relentless sun. The air was dry and smelled of dust and sagebrush. The bus hissed to a stop and the driver called out the name. Ethan was the only one who got off. He stood on the cracked sidewalk, his box in hand, as the bus pulled away, leaving him in a cloud of diesel fumes and absolute silence. The silence was the first thing he noticed. It was total a ringing in his ears after the constant hum of the city and the drone of the bus engine. He felt exposed, a solitary figure on an empty stage. A man in a greasy apron was sweeping the wooden porch of the diner. He stopped and watched Ethan's eyes narrowed with curiosity or suspicion. Ethan probably looked like what he was, a stray out of place and lost. Ethan took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice sounding small in the vast quiet. "I'm looking for a property, the Caldwell property." The man leaned on his broom, squinting. He was old, with a face like a dried apple. "Caldwell, haven't heard that name in years. You must mean old Samuel's place." Ethan's heart leaped. "Yes, Samuel Caldwell. He was my grandfather." The man's expression softened slightly. "Samuel's boy, huh? Well, I'll be. Last I saw him, he was fighting the county tooth and nail to keep you." He shook his head, a sad, distant look crossing his weathered features. "Shame what they did. He was a good man, Samuel. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." He pointed his broom down a dirt road that branched off from the main street. "It's about 5 miles that way. You can't miss it. Last place on the road before it peters out into nothing. Got a collapsed barn and a cabin that ain't fit for a raccoon. You ain't thinking of staying out there, are you?" "Just want to see it," Ethan said, not wanting to admit he had nowhere else to go. The man grunted. "Well, you'll need a ride. Owen over at the store does deliveries. Might take you for a few bucks." He nodded toward the general store, then went back to his sweeping, the conversation clearly over. Owen Bennett was a younger man, maybe early 30s, with a kind face and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He listened to Ethan's request, his eyes taking in the worn jeans and the pathetic cardboard box. "Samuel's place," Owen said, a note of pity in his voice. "Sure, I can take you. But son, there's nothing out there." "I know," Ethan said. "I just need to see it." The ride out was bumpy, the truck rattling along the rutted dirt road. Dust billowed up behind them, coating everything in fine red powder. The landscape grew wilder, the sagebrush thicker, the hills studded with juniper trees and strange formations of rock. It was harsh and beautiful like another planet. "He was a character, your granddad," Owen said, breaking the silence. "Kept to himself mostly after everything. Folks around here thought he was a bit crazy, spent all his time up on that rock of his digging." "Digging?" Ethan asked. "Yep, always digging. Said he was looking for something, never said what." After a few more minutes, Owen slowed the truck. "There she is." Ethan looked and his heart sank like a stone in deep water. Ms. Thorne had been generous in her description. The property was a disaster. A collapsed skeleton of a barn leaned precariously to one side, its frame broken and twisted. The cabin was tiny, its roof sagging dangerously and the middle windows boarded up with warped plywood, the porch choked with weeds and debris. The whole place looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the unforgiving land. And behind it all, looming like a dark, silent sentinel, was a hillside of sheer rock face, his inheritance. Owen pulled the truck to a stop. "This is as far as I go. You sure about this, son?" "I'm sure," Ethan said, his voice hollow. He paid Owen the $10 he asked for, grabbed his box, and stepped out into the dust. Owen gave him a long, worried look, then turned the truck around and drove away, leaving Ethan alone in the oppressive silence. He stood there for a long time, just looking. The despair was a physical weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. This was it. This was the grand prize at the end of his journey. A pile of rubble, a monument to a broken old man's lonely life. Ms. Thorne was right. Owen was right. Everyone was right. It was worthless. Slowly, Ethan walked toward the cabin. The porch steps groaned under his weight, threatening to give way. He had to put his shoulder into the door to get it open, the wood swollen and stubborn. The inside was even worse. One small room thick with the smell of dust, damp, and decay. A broken table, a single chair, a cot with a rotting mattress. Everything covered in a thick layer of grime and cobwebs. It was a tomb, not a home. Ethan dropped his box on the floor. The sound echoed in the small space. A wave of hopelessness washed over him, so powerful it made his knees weak. He had been a fool. He had chased a ghost across the state, spent nearly half his money, all for this. For nothing. He sank onto the filthy floor, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since he was a little boy being pulled away from Samuel's arms, Ethan cried. He cried for the life he'd lost, for the man he barely knew, and for the utter crushing loneliness of his future. After a while, the tears stopped. He was left with a hollow, aching emptiness. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. He knew he couldn't stay in the cabin. It felt unsafe, haunted by years of neglect and failure. He had to see the rest of it. He had to see the cave. Ethan got up, his body stiff and sore, and went back outside. He walked past the cabin, feet crunching on dry, gravelly soil, and headed toward the rock face. The entrance wasn't hard to find. It was a dark, jagged slash in the stone, partially hidden by an overgrown juniper bush. It was smaller than he'd imagined, not a grand cavern, but a narrow opening, a black mouth leading into the earth. A cold draft flowed out of it, carrying the scent of damp stone and ancient cold. It was intimidating. Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding. What was he doing? This was insane. There could be anything in there. Animals, a sheer drop, nothing. But he had come this far. He had to see it through. He took the small flashlight he'd bought at the general store out of his pocket, its beam a weak, trembling spear of light against the encroaching darkness. He took a deep breath, pushed aside the branches, and stepped out of the world and into the cave. The air was immediately colder, the silence deeper. The narrow entrance opened up quickly into a larger chamber, the ceiling high above his head, lost in shadows beyond his flashlight's reach. The ground was smooth, worn down by centuries of water that no longer flowed. The walls were slick with moisture glistening in the light. It was beautiful in a stark, intimidating way. A cathedral of stone and silence. Ethan walked deeper, his footsteps echoing unnervingly. The chamber narrowed again into a smaller passage. He followed it, his light dancing over the rock walls. And then he saw it. In a small alcove tucked away, as if to protect it, was a wooden chest. It wasn't an ancient treasure-filled thing from a pirate movie. It was a simple, sturdy footlocker, the kind soldiers use with a heavy-duty padlock on the front. And sitting on top of it was a small, flat metal box, a biscuit tin. Ethan's breath hitched. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the flashlight steady. This was it. This was what Samuel had been digging for, or maybe what he'd been digging to hide. He knelt down, his light focused on the tin. It wasn't locked. With trembling fingers, he pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a key. It wasn't old and rusted like the cabin key. This one was newer brass, and it looked like it would fit the padlock on the chest perfectly. And underneath the key was a single folded envelope. His name, Ethan, was written on the front in shaky but clear handwriting. Ethan's heart felt like it was going to beat out of his chest. This was a message left just for him. He carefully picked up the envelope, his fingers tracing the letters of his name. He opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside were 2 pages filled with that same handwriting. He angled the flashlight onto the paper and began to read. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, then it means 2 things. The old man on the porch pauses, his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his rocking chair. Tyler leans forward, unable to contain himself. What did the letter say? Grandpa Tyler's voice cracks with anticipation. Ethan, at 62, looks at his grandson with eyes that have seen both the deepest despair and the highest joy. It said, the truth I'd been waiting 12 years to hear, Tyler. The truth that changed everything. He closes his eyes and his voice drops to a whisper, as if he's reading those words again for the first time. The flashlight beam trembled on the yellowed paper in that cold, dark cave 43 years ago. Young Ethan's hands shook as he read the words his grandfather had written, words meant only for him. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, it means I am gone, and for that I am more sorry than you will ever know. Second, it means you have come back. You found this place. You didn't listen to them when they told you it was worthless. You had the heart of an explorer even as a little boy. I knew you would. That stubborn Caldwell blood. Ethan had to stop. Tears blurred the words. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his whole body trembling, with the force of emotions he'd kept buried for 12 years. He took a ragged breath and continued reading. I know you must have questions. I know you must be angry. You have every right to be. They told you I gave you up, didn't they? That I wasn't fit, that I let you go. It's a lie, Ethan. It's the one lie I have had to live with all these years, and it has eaten me alive. I never gave you up. They took you, and I have spent every day since trying to make a way for you to come home." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. A sob escaped his throat, echoing in the silent cave. He had to stop again, pressing his fist against his mouth to keep from crying out. The simple, powerful truth of it was overwhelming. Samuel hadn't abandoned him. The bitterness, all the years of feeling unwanted, all of it evaporated in an instant, replaced by a profound, aching love for this man he barely remembered. "When your parents died, I was all you had, and you were all I had. But I was an old man with a bad pension and a house the county said was falling down. They said I couldn't provide for you. They were going to put you in the system, send you bouncing from house to house. I couldn't let that happen. I begged them, I fought them, but they had the law on their side, so I made a deal with the devil. A man from the state, a coal man in a cheap suit. His name was Gerald Pritchard. He was the county legal advisor at the time. He said if I signed over my parental rights voluntarily, they would ensure you were placed in a stable long-term group home until you were 18. He said it was the only way to keep you from getting lost in the foster system. He said if I fought them and lost, they would make sure I never saw you again. He promised me you would be safe. It was a choice between losing you a little and losing you completely. So I signed. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I chose to let you think I had abandoned you so that you might have a chance at a stable life. I hope someday you can forgive me for that." Ethan sat there in the cold darkness, and the forgiveness Samuel asked for came instantly, completely. There was nothing to forgive. His grandfather had sacrificed his own heart, his own reputation in Ethan's eyes to protect him. He had chosen Ethan's safety over his own peace of mind. The letter continued, and with each word, Ethan felt the foundation of his understanding shift. "But I never gave up on you, son. I knew you would be a man at 19 and you would be free. And I knew you would need a place to land a home. So I started working. This land, this worthless rock, was all I had. But I knew its secret. A secret my father told me and his father told him. This isn't just a cave, Ethan. It's the entrance to a system. And deep inside, there's something valuable. Not gold, not jewels. Something better. Water." Ethan's breath stopped. Water. In this desert country, water was life itself. There's an underground spring in this cave, pure and deep. In a land as dry as this, water is life, Ethan. Water is wealth. The big development companies have been trying to find a reliable water source in this valley for years. They've been buying up land, drilling dry wells, coming up empty. They don't know that the source is right here under our feet. I've spent the last 10 years mapping the caverns, measuring the flow, making sure it was all hidden. This cave is your real inheritance, Ethan. The key in this tin opens the chest. Inside, you'll find everything you need. My maps, my geological surveys, the water potability reports, proof, and something else to help you get started. You have a choice to make. The developers, Titan Industries, they know something is here. They can sense it. They'll come sniffing around. They'll offer you money for the land. They'll tell you it's worthless, then offer you a little something to make you go away. It will be tempting. You could take their money and walk away, start a new life somewhere else. There is no shame in that. You deserve an easy life after everything you have been through. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can use what's in that chest to show them what this land is really worth. You can build a life here on your own terms. It will be hard. They will not make it easy, but this place, Ethan, this is your home. It was my home, and I've kept it safe for you. Whatever you choose, know this. I never stopped loving you, not for one single day. I have watched you from afar, getting pictures when I could, praying you were safe. I am so proud of the man I know you have become. Be strong, Ethan. Be brave, and be happy. All my love. Grandfather. Ethan sat in that cold, silent darkness, the letter clutched in his trembling hands, and wept. He wept for the years they'd lost. He wept for Samuel's lonely secret struggle. He wept for this incredible hidden love. And he wept because for the first time in his life, he felt truly unconditionally loved. Samuel hadn't left him a worthless cave. He'd left him a home. He'd left him a mission. He'd left him a choice. And in that moment, there was no choice at all. On the Perta in 2068, Ethan opens his eyes and looks at Tyler. The boy has tears streaming down his face. He really loved you, Tyler whispers. He did, Tyler. And that's what I didn't know for 12 years. That's what kept me going. And that's what I'm going to pass on to you. He pauses, then continues. But the letter was just the beginning, because I still had to open that chest. The flashlight beam trembled on the heavy padlock. The brass key felt warm in Ethan's hand, a conduit to the past and future both. He slid it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. He lifted the heavy lid, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The first thing he saw was a thick, leather-bound journal. He lifted it out carefully. It was Samuel's. The pages were filled with his familiar, shaky script detailing years of lonely work. There were hand-drawn maps of the cave system so intricate and detailed they looked like something from a fantasy novel. 3 levels clearly marked, passages connecting them, notes on water flow, pressure, temperature. Samuel had documented everything with the precision of a scientist and the care of a man on a sacred mission. Tucked into the back of the journal was a sheaf of official-looking documents. Geological survey results from a lab in Bend dated 1970 through 1973. Water quality tests all confirming what the letter had said. The water was pure, abundant, and valuable. pH balance, no contaminants suitable for human consumption and agricultural use. Professional reports with official seals and signatures. Beneath the journal was a stack of sealed waterproof bags. Ethan opened the first one with shaking hands. It was full of caring. Neat bundles of 20s and 50s held together with rubber bands, slightly musty smelling, but perfectly usable. He pulled them out, his hands shaking harder. He counted it. $10,000. More money than Ethan could comprehend. It was a fortune to a 19-year-old with nothing. It was a start, a foundation, a possibility made real. The next bag held more personal things. Photographs. There was one of his parents young and smiling on their wedding day. Ethan stared at their faces, trying to remember them, but they died when he was 4, and the memories were too faint. There were pictures of him as a baby, a toddler, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, usually held in Samuel's arms or standing beside him. Samuel had kept them all. He had watched his grandson grow up from a distance, collecting these fragments of a life he couldn't be part of. There was also a simple silver locket. Inside was a tiny picture of Samuel and a woman Ethan assumed was his grandmother, who had died before he was born. On the other side, a picture of young Ethan, maybe 5 years old, holding a fish and beaming with pride. Ethan put the locket around his neck. It was heavy, but it was a good weight. The final bag contained a single thick envelope addressed to a law firm in Portland, Chen and Partners, environmental law specialists. Ethan didn't open it. He had a feeling he knew what it was. It was Samuel's ammunition, his legacy, his final move in a game he'd been playing for over a decade. Ethan sat back on his heels, the contents of the chest spread out before him on the cave floor, illuminated by the single lonely beam of his flashlight. This was overwhelming, but it wasn't the crushing despair of the cabin. It was the weight of possibility, of responsibility, of a future he could barely imagine. He thought about the $5,000 Titan Industries had offered. It seemed like such a paltry, insulting sum now. A cheap trick to steal a legacy. Ms. Thorne's words came back to him. Take the money, a fresh start. But this was a fresh start, just not the one she'd imagined. This wasn't about running away. This was about digging in, standing firm, claiming what was his. Ethan's cheap phone had a single bar of service at the mouth of the cave. He found the letter from the developers that Miss Thorne had given him. There was a name and number at the bottom. Marcus Hartwell, Chief Executive Officer. He dialed before he could lose his nerve. It rang twice, then a slick professional voice answered. Hartwell. Hello, Ethan said, his voice steadier than he expected. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm calling about the offer for the property in Juniper Creek. There was a pause, calculated and brief. Ah, Mr. Caldwell. Yes, we've been expecting your call. I trust you've come to your senses and are ready to accept our generous offer. His tone was condescending, oily, the voice of a man used to getting his way with young, desperate people who had no other options. I've seen the property, Ethan said, his grip tightening on the phone, and I've seen your offer. Excellent, Hartwell said smoothly. $5,000. We can have the paperwork messengered to you tomorrow. A quick and easy transaction. You'll be on your way in no time. Ethan took a deep breath. The cold cave air filled his lungs. He looked at the chest, at Samuel's journal, at the life his grandfather had fought to preserve for him. The words came out clear and firm. The offer is rejected. The silence on the other end was heavy charged with surprise and irritation. Ethan could almost hear the man processing his words, his arrogance turning to annoyance. "I'm sorry, Tim," Hartwell said, his voice losing its slickness. "I don't think I heard you correctly." "You heard me," Ethan said, a new unfamiliar confidence rising in him. "The offer is rejected. The property is not for sale." "Mr. Caldwell," Hartwell said, his voice now cold and hard, "let's be realistic. You're a 19-year-old kid with nothing. That land is a worthless pile of rocks. Our offer is more than fair. It's charity." "It's funny you should mention rocks," Ethan said, the words of Samuel's letter echoing in his mind. "My grandfather did some surveys. He found the water table. He found the source." Another pause, longer, this time more charged. Hartwell knew or suspected. That's why they'd been so persistent. That's why they'd kept the offer standing for years. "That's a ridiculous bluff, son," Hartwell finally spat, but the confidence was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, angry edge. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have his maps," Ethan said calmly, "his geological reports, his water potability tests. I have everything. So here's my counteroffer. You can leave me and my land alone, or you can come back with an offer that reflects the actual value of the only viable water source in this entire valley. And I'm talking millions, Mr. Hartwell, not thousands." Ethan didn't wait for a response. He hung up. His hand was shaking, his heart hammering, but he was smiling, a real, genuine smile. For the first time in his life, he hadn't just accepted what the world handed him. He had pushed back. He had fought. On the porch in 2068, Ethan smiles at the memory. Tyler is staring at him with wide eyes. "You just hung up on him." "Boom. I hung up on him," Ethan confirmed. "And Tyler, that was the moment I knew I wasn't that powerless kid anymore. I had something they wanted, and I had proof." The night in the cave was cold, but Ethan barely noticed. He had Samuel's heavy wool coat from the chest, and he spent hours reading the journal by flashlight. It was more than just data and maps. It was Samuel's story, his voice speaking across the years. Samuel wrote about his loneliness. February 24th, 1972. 1 year today since they took Ethan. "I sit here in silence and wonder if he remembers me, if he hates me." He wrote about his fears. "I'm afraid I'll die before he turns 18. Afraid he'll never know the truth. So I work faster." He wrote about his anger. "Pritchard came by today, asked if I wanted to reconsider my decision. I ran him off. He's not a good man. I know that now, but it's too late." He wrote about small victories. "Found the third passage today. Leads to the main spring chamber. Flow is stronger than I thought. Enough for a whole town. Enough for Ethan's future. Got the results from the lab. Water is perfect. I cried when I read the report. I found it. I found the way to bring him home. Saw a golden eagle today, flying over the land. I took it as a sign. Ethan will soar. I'll make sure of it." He wrote about memories. Remember when Ethan was 5? He caught his first fish. Tiny thing, but he was proud as if it was a marlin. "I took a picture. It's in the chest now, waiting for him." Reading it felt like having a conversation with Samuel, like he was sitting right there in the dark beside him. Samuel wasn't a crazy old man digging holes. He was a scientist, a strategist, a protector. He had waged a silent 10-year war on Ethan's behalf, and he had won. The next morning, Ethan walked the 5 miles back into town. He felt like a different person. The despair was gone, replaced by quiet, fierce determination. He had a purpose now, a mission handed down through generations. At the general store, Owen Bennett was behind the counter. He gave Ethan a surprised look. "Figured you'd be on the next bus out," Owen said. "I'm staying," Ethan told him. "I need to buy some supplies, cleaning stuff, basic food work gloves." Owen raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He helped Ethan gather what he needed. As Ethan was paying with one of the crisp $50 bills from the chest, he asked casually, "Do you know a good handyman? The cabin needs a lot of work, a new roof for starters." Owen stared at the 50, then back at Ethan's face. The pity in his eyes was gone, replaced by curiosity and something like respect. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Never been more serious about anything in my life," Ethan said. Owen nodded slowly. "My cousin Clay. He does good work. Not cheap, but honest. I'll give him a call for you." That afternoon, a dusty pickup truck that looked even older than Owen's rumbled up to the cabin. A burly man with a kind, weathered face got out. This was Clayton Morrison, 51 years old, a former contractor who'd actually worked for Samuel years ago. Ethan showed him the cabin, the sagging roof, the rotten floorboards. Clay walked through it, poking at the walls, his expression grim. "This is a gut job, son," Clay said, his voice a low rumble. "Be cheaper to tear it down and start over." "I can't do that," Ethan said firmly. "It was my grandfather's. I want to fix it." Clay looked at him, then at the desolate property, then back at him. He saw the determination in the young man's eyes, the same stubborn will he'd seen in Samuel all those years ago. "All right," Clay said with a sigh. "All right, kid, we'll fix it, but it's going to take time and money." "I have money," Ethan said, and for the first time in his life, it was true. They worked out a plan. Start with the roof to make the place watertight, then the floors and windows. Do it in stages as Ethan could afford it. Ethan paid him for the first load of materials, and Clay promised to start the next day. As Clay was leaving, he paused and turned back. "You know," Clay said quietly, "your granddad tried to hire me to fix this place up years ago. Right before, well, you know, he ran out of money fighting the state to keep you. Said he spent every last dime on lawyers." Clay shook his head, the sad, distant look in his eyes. "He loved you a whole lot, kid. Don't ever forget that." On the porch in 2068, Tyler wipes his eyes. "Great-grandfather spent all his money on you." Ethan nods, his own eyes wet. "Every cent. Fighting the system. Hiring lawyers. Trying to keep me. And when he lost, he spent the next 10 years making sure I'd have something when I came back." He pauses, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the kind of love you can't measure, Tyler. That's the kind of love that survives death itself." The work was hard, brutally hard. While Clay and his small crew worked on the cabin structure, Ethan took on the task of clearing the property. He hauled away truckloads of junk, tore down the collapsed barn piece by piece, pulled weeds until his hands were raw and blistered, even through thick work gloves. Every evening, exhausted and covered in dirt, he would retreat to the cave. It had become his sanctuary, his connection to Samuel. He'd eat a simple meal and read more of the journal, learning about local geology, about how water flowed through different kinds of rock, memorizing the maps. The cave system was his inheritance, and he was determined to know it as well as Samuel did. Word got around Juniper Creek. People were curious about the city kid fixing up old Samuel's place. They'd seen the developer's fancy car. They'd heard the rumors. Slowly, they started to open up. Ed Sullivan from the diner would bring him a hot meal sometimes. Owen would drop off supplies and refuse to take full payment. Clay started calling him Ethan instead of Kid. Ethan was no longer an outsider. He was becoming part of the community. Samuel had chosen the community that had known and respected his grandfather. 7 weeks in, Ethan drove to Portland in a borrowed truck. He went to the law office Samuel had addressed the envelope to. Chen and Partners, a small, scrappy firm specializing in environmental law. He met with Jennifer Chen, a sharp, passionate woman in her early 40s. Ethan gave her the envelope Samuel had left. Inside was a retainer paid for years ago and a detailed summary of Samuel's findings along with explicit instructions. "Help my grandson fight when the time comes." Chen was impressed by the thoroughness of Samuel's research. "Your grandfather was an amazing strategist, Mr. Caldwell. This research is solid. Titan won't be able to challenge it easily." "But they'll try," Ethan said. Chen nodded. "They'll try. They have money lawyers' influence. But we have the truth. And in environmental law, the truth is the most powerful weapon." She agreed to represent him not just because Samuel had paid, but because it was right. With her help, Ethan filed the official water rights claim with the state of Oregon. As expected, Titan Industries immediately filed a challenge. The legal battle began, a slow, grinding process of paperwork and procedural motions. But Ethan wasn't alone. He had Samuel's meticulous research, a team of lawyers who believed in his case, and most importantly, he had a home to fight for. On the porch, Ethan looks at Tyler as the last light fades from the sky. And that's when the real enemy showed up. Tyler. Not Hartwell, but the man who'd stolen your great-grandfather from me in the first place. Tyler leans forward. "Who?" "Councilman Gerald Pritchard," Ethan says, his voice hardening. "And the fight with him would test everything I believed in. The stars are coming out over the Oregon high desert, countless points of light against the deepening blue. Ethan rises from his rocking chair, his joints protesting slightly, and gestures for Tyler to follow him inside. The cabin is warm and welcoming now, filled with handmade furniture and photographs spanning 3 generations. He pours 2 glasses of water from the tap water that flows clear and cold from the spring deep beneath their feet. This water, Ethan says, handing Tyler a glass, is what everything came down to. Not just the money, not just the land. The water was life itself, and there were men who would do anything to control it. He settles into a worn leather chair, and Tyler sits across from him on the couch that Nora, Ethan's wife, and Tyler's grandmother made them buy 15 years ago. Let me tell you about the war that followed. 1 week after Ethan's phone call with Hartwell, a sleek black sedan that had no business on that dirt road rolled up to the property. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. It was Marcus Hartwell himself, come to see what kind of foolish kid had dared to refuse him. Hartwell looked around at the flurry of activity. New rafters were going up on the cabin roof. Piles of cleared brush sat ready for burning. The property was transforming before his eyes, and his face was a mask of controlled fury. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality, "I was in the area. I thought we should talk face to face." Ethan was loading rotten wood into a wheelbarrow. He didn't stop working. "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't be a fool," Hartwell hissed, stepping closer. "You can't win this. We have a team of lawyers who will tie you up in court for years. We'll challenge the deed, the surveys, everything. You'll be broke before you even see a courtroom." Ethan finally stopped and turned to face him. He was covered in sweat and grime. Hartwell was pristine in his $1,000 suit. They were from 2 different worlds, but Ethan no longer felt like the lesser man. "And you'll be spending millions in legal fees to fight a kid for a worthless piece of land?" Ethan asked calmly. "Your shareholders will love that, especially when the local news gets hold of the story. Big corporation trying to swindle an orphan out of his inheritance. It's a good story. I think it'll get a lot of attention." Hartwell's face went pale. Ethan was bluffing about the media angle, but Hartwell didn't know that. The younger man had learned from Samuel. You had to be stubborn, and you had to be smart. "This isn't over," Hartwell snarled. He got back in his car and sped away, spraying gravel. Ethan knew he was right. It wasn't over. But he wasn't scared anymore. That same afternoon, as Clay was packing up his tools, he called out to Ethan. "You've got another visitor." An older sedan, dusty and worn, pulled up. A man in his early 60s stepped out, silver-haired and distinguished-looking, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was Councilman Gerald Pritchard, a man who'd represented the district in various capacities for over 20 years. "Ethan Caldwell," Pritchard said, his voice honey smooth. "I've heard so much about you. I'm Councilman Pritchard. I've served this area for 2 decades now." "I know who you are," Ethan said coldly. Pritchard's smile faltered slightly. "Is that so?" Ethan stepped closer, the anger he'd been holding back for weeks finally finding a target. "You're the man who came to see my grandfather 12 years ago. The one who told him that if he signed away his rights, I'd be placed in a stable group home. You promised him I'd be safe." Pritchard's face went carefully blank. The politician's smile disappeared. "You told my grandfather that if he fought you, you'd make sure he never saw me again. You scared an old man into giving up his grandson, and now you're here because of what? To help Titan Industries take my land." Pritchard's expression hardened. "Boy, you don't understand what you're talking about. You're playing a game you don't comprehend." "I understand perfectly," Ethan said. "You took a 6-year-old away from the only family he had left, and now you're here to finish what you started 12 years ago." Pritchard's face reddened. "You should be careful with accusations, son. I'm a public servant. I do what's best for this community." "The community?" Ethan asked. "Or your wallet?" Pritchard stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Listen here, boy. You're playing with forces in this county that you cannot fight. Sign the papers. Take the money. Leave, or you will lose everything." "Get off my land," Ethan said. Pritchard stared at him for a long moment, then got back in his car and drove away. But Ethan knew the threat was real. The true enemy wasn't Titan Industries. It was this local man with local power, the man who'd destroyed his family once before. On the porch in 2068, Ethan pauses to drink his water. Tyler is gripping his own glass so tightly his knuckles are white. What did you do? Tyler asks. I got help from an unexpected place, Ethan says with a small smile, from someone who understood exactly what I was going through. The next day, Ethan was at Owen's store buying more supplies when a teenage girl approached him. She was about 16, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing faded jeans and a worried expression. You're Ethan Caldwell, right? She asked quietly. Yeah, who are you? I'm Nora Pritchard. I'm the councilman's granddaughter. Ethan stiffened, but something in her eyes stopped him from walking away. She looked scared and determined in equal measure. I think you should know something, Nora said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I heard my grandparents talking last night. The councilman is working with Titan Industries. He's been getting consulting fees to help them acquire land. But there's more. He was the one who convinced your grandfather to sign those papers 12 years ago. He wasn't just a social worker. He was the county legal advisor back then. He had the power to make custody decisions, and he lied to your grandfather about the process. Ethan felt like the ground was tilting beneath him. Why are you telling me this? Nora's eyes filled with tears. Because I know what it's like to be lied to by the system. I'm a foster kid too. My grandparents only took me in 3 years ago because of the monthly checks. And when I heard them talking about doing the same thing to you that was done to you when you were little, I couldn't stay quiet. Do you have proof? Ethan asked. No, she admitted, but I know he keeps old files in his home office, if you needed evidence. Ethan looked at this brave girl who was risking everything to help a stranger. Why are you really doing this, Nora? Because someone needs to stand up to him, an anthem, she said simply, and because you remind me that it's possible to fight back. Over the next few weeks, as the legal battle intensified, Ethan and Nora developed an unlikely friendship. She would stop by the property, sometimes helping with small tasks, sharing what she overheard. Ethan became a mentor to her, showing her that the system didn't have to define you, that you could build something real from nothing. The months crawled by. Titan filed motion after motion to invalidate the deed, claiming Samuel hadn't been mentally competent when he set up the trust, that the geological surveys were fraudulent, that the water rights were unclear. Jennifer Chen countered every move with Samuel's meticulous documentation. The evidence was overwhelming, but Titan had deep pockets and an army of lawyers determined to drag it out. Pritchard began a whisper campaign against Ethan in town. The kid was going to ruin Juniper Creek. He was standing in the way of development that could bring growth and prosperity. He was selfish, holding on to something he didn't understand. Some people believed it. A few store owners stopped serving Ethan, but most of the town, the people who'd known Samuel, stood firm. Ed Sullivan, Owen Bennett, Clay Morrison. They knew what this fight was really about. The $10,000 started to run low. Legal fees were mounting. The cabin renovation slowed. Ethan faced an impossible choice: stop the work and conserve money for the legal fight, or keep building his home and risk running out of funds before the case was won. He chose to fight. The cabin quoted, the land was what mattered. One evening, following Samuel's maps, Ethan explored deeper into the cave system than he'd gone before. He descended to the 3rd level. His grandfather had marked a narrow passage that opened into a chamber twice the size of the first. And there, flowing from a crack in the rock wall, was the spring itself. Clear, cold water, more abundant than he'd imagined, pooling in a natural basin before disappearing into underground channels. It was beautiful and powerful, a secret that had waited millions of years to be found. Tucked in a crevice near the spring, Ethan found a second metal box smaller than the first. Inside was another set of documents. These were the original papers from 12 years ago, the custody transfer forms. And there, clear as day, was Gerald Pritchard's signature, with his title listed as County Legal Advisor, not Social Worker. Clipped to the papers was a handwritten note from Samuel. Ethan, if you find this, it means you've gone deeper than I expected. Good. Pritchard lied to me. He told me I had to sign or I'd never see you again. But I found out later he was working for developers even then, trying to get this land. I kept this evidence safe. Use it when the time is right. Trust your instincts. I love you. Samuel. Ethan held the papers with shaking hands. This was the proof, the ammunition he needed. But he had to use it wisely. 3 months after Ethan filed his water rights claim, Titan Industries and Councilman Pritchard organized a town hall meeting. The subject was future water development in Harlan County. It was a trap, a public relations move designed to turn the community against Ethan and force him to settle. The meeting was held in the county council chamber. 60 or 70 people packed in, curious and concerned. Marcus Hartwell stood at the front with a slick PowerPoint presentation about jobs, investment, modern water infrastructure for the whole region. All they needed was cooperation from Mr. Caldwell. Pritchard spoke next, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. I understand the young man is emotional about his grandfather's property, but sometimes the greater good must come before personal attachment. We're prepared to offer fair compensation. Some people nodded, others looked skeptical. Ed Sullivan sat in the front row, arms crossed. Owen and Clay were there too, watching carefully. Then Ethan stood up from the back row. Can I say something? He asked. Pritchard's face tightened with displeasure, but this was a public meeting. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. This is an open forum. Ethan walked to the front carrying a folder. He looked older than his 19 years, hardened by months of physical labor and legal warfare. This wasn't the scared kid who'd stepped off the bus anymore. 2 months ago, Ethan began, his voice clear and steady. I came to this town with a cardboard box and a deed everyone said was worthless. I was a foster kid with no family, no home, no future. My grandfather, Samuel Caldwell, lived in this community for over 50 years. He was a good man. Ed Sullivan told me that. Clay Morrison told me that. Many of you remember him. He paused, letting his words settle. They told me the land he left was worthless. They told me to take $5,000 and disappear. But my grandfather left me more than land. He left me the truth. Ethan opened his folder and held up the geological surveys. This is proof that beneath my property lies the largest underground water source in this valley. My grandfather spent 10 years researching it, measuring it, documenting it. He didn't do it for money. He did it because he wanted to leave me a future. Hartwell stood up. This is absurd. We're offering real development. You're offering theft, Ethan said, his voice hardening. You want to buy land worth millions for thousands. But that's not even the worst part. He pulled out the second set of documents, the ones from the spring chamber. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained strong. This is proof that Councilman Pritchard has been working with Titan Industries for over a decade. And this, he held up the custody papers, is proof that 12 years ago he lied to my grandfather to take me away so he could eventually get this land. A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Pritchard's face went from red to white. That's slander, Pritchard shouted. I was a public servant doing my duty. Ethan walked closer, holding up the papers. These documents show you signed as county legal advisor, not as a social worker. You had the power to make custody decisions, and you told my grandfather that if he didn't voluntarily give up his rights, he'd never see me again. You threatened an old man to steal his land, and now you're here trying to finish what you started. Ed Sullivan stood up, his old voice carrying through the chamber. Gerald, I've lived here longer than you've been alive. I remember when you came to work for the county. I also remember when Samuel told me something wasn't right about how they took Ethan. Now we know why. Owen stood, then Clay. One by one, people rose to their feet, not in applause, but in silent solidarity with Ethan. Hartwell realized they were losing. This meeting is over. We'll see you in court. But as Titan's representatives and Pritchard hurried out, the room erupted not in anger, but in support. People came up to Ethan, shaking his hand, offering words of encouragement. The tide had turned. Outside the chamber, Nora was waiting. She hugged Ethan quickly, tears in her eyes. You did it. You told the truth. We did it, Ethan said. Thank you for trusting me. 3 more months passed. The legal battle continued, but everything had changed after the town hall. The local newspaper ran a story about Pritchard's conflict of interest. An ethics investigation was launched. Public opinion swung heavily against Titan Industries. Finally, Marcus Hartwell called Ethan directly. Mr. Caldwell, he said, his voice tired and stripped of its earlier arrogance. I think it's time we talked, not as enemies, as businessmen. They met at Jennifer Chen's office in Portland. Hartwell, 2 of his lawyers, Ethan and Chen, sat around a conference table. Hartwell laid out a proposal. Titan would withdraw from the lawsuit. They would acknowledge Ethan's water rights. In exchange, Ethan would lease them water access with strict terms. $500,000 per year for 10 years renewable. Ethan would retain ownership of the land. There would be stringent conservation limits to protect the spring. and a portion of the profits would be reinvested in Juniper Creek's infrastructure. Jennifer Chen looked at Ethan. This is a good deal. You keep the land, you get stable income, and you protect the water. Ethan sat quietly thinking he could keep fighting. He might win completely. But at what cost? Years in court, millions in legal fees. He remembered Samuel's words. Build a life here on your own terms. Sometimes wisdom meant knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. I agree, Ethan said, on one additional condition. What's that? Hartwell asked. Part of the annual payment goes into a scholarship fund for foster children in Oregon. It'll be called the Samuel Caldwell Memorial Scholarship. Chen smiled. Hartwell nodded slowly. Deal. As they were signing the papers, Hartwell asked to speak with Ethan privately. They stepped into an empty office. I need to tell you something, Hartwell said. 20 years ago, I was a foster kid like you. I put myself through law school on scholarships and loans. I thought if I became rich and successful, I'd prove everyone wrong who said I'd never amount to anything. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. I became exactly what I used to hate. He looked at Ethan with genuine respect. You reminded me of who I used to be. Thank you for that. Ethan didn't know what to say. Even the villain had a story, had reasons, had once been someone different. On the porch in 2068, Ethan finishes his water and sets the glass down gently. 1 year later, he tells Tyler, the cabin was finished. The land was productive. I used some of the money to help Juniper Creek fixing roads supporting the school. Nora graduated high school and got into college on the Samuel Caldwell Scholarship. And I asked her to marry me. Tyler's eyes widen. Grandma Nora? That was her. Ethan nods, smiling. That was her. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever met. She stood up to her own family to help a stranger. We built this life together, had your mother here in this cabin. And when Nora passed 5 years ago, she was buried up on the hill next to where we scattered Samuel's ashes. He stands his old bones creaking and walks to the window. The cave entrance is visible in the moonlight. But the most important part of the story hasn't happened yet, Tyler. As if on cue, headlights appear on the dirt road. Owen Bennett's truck pulls up, and from the passenger side, a small figure emerges. A boy, maybe 8 years old, with a battered backpack and frightened eyes. Ethan walks out onto the porch with Tyler following. Owen helps the boy out, speaking quietly to him. Ethan, Owen calls. This is Marcus. He just came out of the foster system in Portland. No family, nowhere to go. I thought maybe you could help. Ethan looks at the boy and sees himself 43 years ago. Lost, scared, convinced the world has given up on him. He walks down the steps and kneels to be eye level with the child. Hello, Marcus, Ethan says gently. My name is Ethan. I know what it feels like to be lost. But I promise you, you're not alone. You have a home here if you want it. The boy's lip trembles. Really? Really, Ethan says, and he feels Tyler's hand on his shoulder, 3 generations connected in this moment. Someone fought for me once. Now it's my turn to fight for you. He stands and looks at Tyler. And someday, it'll be your turn to fight for someone else. That's what legacy means, Tyler. Not the money or the land. It's what we pass forward. It's helping the next person find their way home. The stars blaze overhead, countless and eternal. The spring flows deep beneath the earth as it has for millions of years, as it will for millions more. And in this small corner of Oregon on land that was once called worthless, 4 people stand together in the warm light spilling from the cabin windows. Ethan puts his arm around Tyler and gestures for young Marcus to come closer. Let me tell you both about your great-grandfather Samuel, he says, about the cave and the water and the truth that saved us all. And as they walk inside together, the old man's voice carries on the desert wind, telling again the story that matters most. The story of how a worthless cave became a home, how abandonment became love, how one man's sacrifice echoed through generations, saving not just one lost boy, but dozens, maybe hundreds, through the scholarship fund and the example of standing firm. The door closes, the lights glow warm against the darkness. And the legacy continues as Samuel always knew it would, flowing forward like the endless spring, giving life to everything it touches.